Yeah, hello everybody, and welcome back to the MC65FM podcast. Today's guest combines military discipline, enterprise architecture, and passion for helping IT professionals mastering Microsoft technologies. He is a Microsoft MVP, Microsoft focused architect, technologist, US Marine Corps combat veteran, community contributor, speaker, mentor, and open source advocate. After serving 3 tours in Iraq, he built a career helping organizations modernize identity, endpoint management, and security with Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Entra ID, PowerShell, and automation. Known for turning complex Microsoft concepts into practical guidance, scripts, and real-world solutions, he dedicated countless hours to sharing knowledge with the Microsoft community. Today, we'll deep dive into my Windows device management, Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Entra ID, and especially Entra Privileged Identity Management, one of the most important technologies for implementing zero trust and protecting administrative access. Mark, well, it's absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you having me join, and I'm excited to talk anything and everything Microsoft Cloud, whether it's uh, Entra ID and or Intune. I've done a little bit of everything in my career, and so I love it, and I love to talk about it.
Yeah. Um, you work at the Marine Corps, and now you're an IT professional. Can you little bit tell us about your journey?
Yeah, so sort of my journey into where I am today. Um, I joined the United States Marine Corps in 2005. And at that point, I was a radio operator. And so we did line of sight communication. And so that line of sight communication, um, you think of it like an FM radio. As you drive through town, you lose signal, and then you come to another town, and then you may gain signal on a different radio station. So it was exactly what you would think. It's line of sight. If you can see the antenna, you can talk. But what that pivoted to rather quickly in the midst of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom was IP-based communication. And what this meant was satellite communication. And so we started to get into the realm of on the move satcom. And so I did some satcom for a time, but where my IT career really started was in satellite internet, with the concept of Sipper Nipper Very Small Aperture Terminal. And so it's a really long acronym for satellite internet. And so, kind of what this looked like is I'd be um, either I'd obtain a satellite antenna. We would point the satellite antenna at a um, azimuth in the sky, so a satellite, and then you would have your um, commercial internet, you'd have your secure internet and your very secure internet. And then that's when I started to learn IP protocols and how to tip a Cat 5 cable, um, how to you know manage a subnet, and I kind of took that and ran with it. And when I came back to the United States, they basically voluntold me and said, um, as the Marine Corps does, um, basically made me the director of IT, right? And so I managed all of the network infrastructure, endpoints, SharePoint, all of that sort of stuff. And that's how I kind of got introduced into the Microsoft Cloud. Um, they wanted to do an on-prem SharePoint migration to the cloud, and so that was my um, first introduction into Microsoft Cloud services.
Yeah. In the military, have you learned something like skills or habits that helps you today and working in enterprise IT?
Yeah, for sure. I've got a friend of mine that was in the sheriff's department for 25 plus years. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, sometimes he'd give me a hard time and he'd say, I'm walking around with a chisel and a hammer and we're going to knock some of that Marine off. And I think the thing is, right, like, so if an application service endpoint is down, and most commonly, an end user can't do what they need to do. In the Marine Corps, when a service was down, it might have been life or death. You didn't really have a choice. You had to get it back up and be operational in some way, right? And so, whether that was scrapping the whole thing and doing it the way you knew could work, or just trying to get the existing system back up, there was no like having a system down was not an answer that was acceptable. And so I think that I've kind of taken that with me as I've gone into the private sector and into enterprise like the one that um, I manage today. We just don't take no for an answer, and we're gonna make sure that the service is up as quickly as humanly possible.
Mm.
Um, my boss kind of jokes, and says, um, nobody's gonna get hurt, nobody's gonna, lose life, limb, or eyesight. Uh, but we got to get it back up, and we got to get the system, no matter what it is, back and operational. And so I take pride in uptime, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when we was, but I think a little bit it's not really true because when you get hacked or identity gets stolen, uh, I say it's called the we say in Germany in the army we say blue land versus red land and so on. When Redland gets the informations, it's also not so good. But yeah, let's deep dive in the identity topic. I think we often hear, especially from Microsoft and other experts, identity is a new parameter. What does it actually mean from your perspective?
Well, I think that I'm trying to think about where I want to start here. And so, when I come into an organization, or I listen to um, friends in the industry, or I did sit in contractor roles and I do an evaluation. I hear things all the time, right? Like, we want to do this AI model and we want to do that AI model and we want Copilot and we want um, device compliance and we want these 14 criteria for um, device compliance. And I say, okay, I hear you. I understand. What are we doing for multi-factor authentication? And they say, well, we have some users on SMS. We have some users that do authenticator plus number matching. Um, some of our privileged users have pass keys. And I say to them, I said, well, we need to stop before we can go do anything with um, sophisticated device compliance or custom device compliance. Let's focus on the identity planning. Oh, but we have to have AI. We have to have a SharePoint readiness. Well, if you're not going to protect the identity, we're approaching this backwards. We have to protect the identity plane first, right? And more importantly than an end user, we have to protect privileged accounts, right? And so the first place I start is, at a minimum, we get to passwordless authentication, right? And so um, what the desired goal here is to get to a compliant device that uses phishing resistant authentication, and you can even take it a step further, but I'll hold on to that until we start talking about Entra PIM. Um, the the issue that I see and have seen multiple times across multiple clients is, well, we don't want to inhibit the end user. It's too much of a lift to get to passkeys or passwordless. And my response back is, once you get to passwordless, once you get to passkeys, you're protecting your identity plane and you're making it more convenient for the end user at the same time. So, so it's a win-win. And so, from my perspective, your identity is the most important vector that exists.
Mm. Yeah, I see a study here in Europe. 84% of all attacks are identity attacks.
Yeah.
Why did attackers choose identities more often than I say attack the infrastructure?
Well, um, people have habits and people are the point of entry, right? And so I don't know how many times I've seen people use the same password for their Netflix that they use for their iCloud. They come across their iCloud and then to their personal Microsoft account. And so if one account gets hacked, that entire password um, repository, for lack of better term, is essentially um, out on the open internet. And then so bad behavior persists, right? And then that Netflix password that is hacked ends up in an enterprise, right? So even if you do take the extra step and you say, I'm going to do number matching plus password, it's not really that hard to grab a code, right? And it's really not that hard to grab an SMS. You see YouTube videos of people cracking SMS all the time, and the starting point is a password. And so, um, if humans are going to continue to be humans and have bad behavior, identities will always be the number one attack vector until they're not, right?
Mm.
Until passwords aren't a thing anymore. And so, I've been doing passwordless authentication since 2019, since since before it was cool or trendy. And so we're coming up on my 7th year of passwordless authentication, whether that's Windows Hello for Business, passwordless on Authenticator, YubiKey. The number one thing I would tell any organization is to get passwords out and get passwordless in.
Mm. Um, yeah, we see. Well, when we look at the danger, uh, you have a lot of experience. What did companies doing wrong with privileged accounts? What's the mistakes you see often? Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest mistake that I see, and lots of organizations make this mistake, right, is I'm a global admin, right? So I'm a medium-sized or small business, and so the global admin does lots of things. They manage teams, they manage Exchange, they manage um, the whole M365 stack, whether that's Purview, Power Apps, you name it, right? But they also manage Intune. They also manage Azure. And so in those types of organizations, the primary thing that I see is we're managing those administrative accounts with our productivity account.
Mm.
And so we don't practice best practice in having a cloud only um, Active Directory disconnected, intra hardened account that only interacts with um, admin and admin tasks. And so what you're essentially doing is you're not broadcasting to the world that that has credentials, but if it does have the ability to either access administrative tasks, if you're sending emails, sending teams. That's a phishing opportunity, right?
mm,
And
mm,
so what we want to do is create a cloud only isolated account with no productivity license at all, and then privilege it.
mm.
And
And I think when we look at the security groups and so on, there it's one word or two words. Zero trust. We have well, we hear every time. How do zero trust influence identity architecture today, from your
right.
perspective?
So from my perspective, you're never going to get to zero trust. You're never going to get there. Zero trust is a moving target, and every time we discuss zero trust, we say, well, what about this vector and what about that vector? And so the thing that I push folks to is don't let perfect get in the way of better, right? And so when we look at that zero trust architecture and we start talking about um, device compliance plus passwordless authentication or plus phishing resistant authentication, um, from a zero trust perspective, you want to take a device from a known network, right? A network that we trust, right? On a um, client VPN or intra private access or a reverse proxy. We want to say we have this set of device compliance criteria, right? Whether that's BitLocker enforcement, antivirus, whatever fits best for your environment. And we could probably have a whole podcast on that topic. Um, plus, plus phishing resistant authentication, plus another layer to that is when you're doing administrative tasks, you do what's called device filtering, right? And so you say, if I have an administrative account, the device has to be compliant. It has to be a known workstation, and we have to do phishing resistant, right? And so if you can if you can accomplish that, right? If you can accomplish that objective, a compliant device on a known network with phishing resistant and a known good workstation, don't let the overwhelming portion of zero trust get in the way of good and great.
Mm,
Don't I feel like zero trust is a moving target. And I see so many organizations get paralyzed trying to be perfect. Let's get let's get as good as we can get within reason and then narrow our focus towards the 5 or 10% that we're missing,
mm,
right? So many organizations don't do things like intra hardened accounts,
mm,
device compliance enforcement, known workstation, that we miss the forest through the trees.
mm. Yeah, I think when we Microsoft had a lot of solutions, especially in cybersecurity, but when we talk about identity management, there are, yeah, I say two tools. They stand out. It's the one side is Intune and the other is Entra ID. Ooh, how yeah, how complement these tools each other from your perspective?
Yeah, so it's supposed to complement one another, right? And so um, I don't feel like you can do one without the other. And so um, what I have always pushed people to do is to manage their identity, doing the things that um, I've already previously mentioned, right? And so, if you're doing phishing resistant authentication, then you pivot to the device, right? And so when you pivot to the device, a couple of things that I look at to support the identity plane. The first thing that I do is I would look at Windows Hello for Business. Are we using Windows Hello for Business? Yes or no? And so once we establish Windows Hello for Business, then we're phishing resistant at the end point, right?
Mm,
And so you want to be phishing resistant in an interactive browser, right? When you go to Edge and you sign in, but you also want to be phishing resistant on the device. But then when you get logged into the device, the things that we're looking for from a device compliance perspective is secure boot enabled? Do we have an antivirus um, protection enabled? Um, and you can even go as far as saying, are you coming from a known workstation and tie that into a compliance rule? And those compliance rules are governed by Microsoft Intune. And so, what Microsoft Intune does is you apply a compliance policy and you say you have to meet these criteria in order to be compliant. And then it sends that compliance signal back to Entra ID and it basically says yes or no for each one of those criteria. And so at that point, what you're evaluating is conditional access, right? And you're saying this device has to be compliant in order to access company resources. And if any of those things aren't true, then the device can't access those resources. So when you utilize things like phishing resistant MFA at the identity plane, and you combine it with conditional access and device compliance in Microsoft Intune, you get the best of both worlds.
Mm. Yeah, Mark, you're really knowing or famous for the Microsoft Entra PIM topic. What exactly is Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management?
Yeah, so when you look at it at Entra PIM, you're talking about at the root of it, you're talking about just-in-time access, right? And
Mhm.
so when we're talking about just-in-time access, we're talking about I have an Entra ID role that does an administrative task, right? And so when I first came into the industry, I saw lots of bad practices, right? Microsoft says 5 global admin or less. I would come into some clients and I would have 12 global admin, and they would all have persistent permissions. And so at some juncture in my career, Microsoft introduced privileged identity management. And so what that says is we no longer have persistent permissions. And so the account isn't privileged statically. And so what that does is through PIM enabled security groups, right? You can activate your role as needed. And so when you activate, you can activate your role for a specific period of time. And so what we try to do, right, is practice least privilege access. And so what that kind of looks like is what role am I in as an administrator? What am I doing? Right. And so things that stick out to me is I will have somebody who is an Intune administrator or a global admin need to remove someone from a group. And so they will elevate to global admin in the privileged identity management console to global admin or Intune admin to go remove a user from a group. All the meanwhile, they've got group administrator. Why on earth did we just elevate a significantly more um, powerful role when you had the role assigned to you? And so when you look at PIM and just-in-time access, one of the things that I guide organizations to is to have tightly coupled elevation windows, right? And so I hear from administrators all the time, well, when I elevate my role, it should be for 9 hours. It should be for 8 hours. I don't want to elevate it 2 and 3 times a day. And I say, well, your shift is 8 hours. I'm never going to give you more than eight. But really, what we should do, from my perspective, is we should be elevating doing a ticket or a task, and then we should be deactivating our role.
Mm,
But humans are humans. And so the Institute of Technology actually disagrees with me on this, but this is a hill that I will die on.
mm,
I set roles to elevate no greater than 4 hours. So if you simulate your day and you start your day at 8 a.m., we typically take a break at 12 and we go eat some food.
mm,
So my goal with a 4 hour elevation is that the session never goes unattended. And what I mean by that is you're typically in front of your machine for that 4 hour period before you go step away for lunch. And at that point, it'll expire. And when you come back, you re-elevate at approximately 1 p.m. and you've got your permission for the remainder of the shift. But in practice, even that is a bad practice. Um, Just-in-time elevation should be task driven, and when the task is complete, deactivate your role because you're opening yourself up to risk, not only to yourself but to the organization. And sometimes it just boils down to I don't want to be inconvenienced. And we can talk about a tool that I've built to help with that inconvenience
mm.
if you want.
Yeah, yeah. That's how is this called the tool?
Yeah. So um, when you manage multiple modalities inside of Intra and Office 365, whether that's teams, groups, um, or it's Intune, different blades inside Entra, you can accumulate several roles, right? And so lots of people have 6, 7, 8 roles. And so they tell me, well, Mark, I've got to activate this role, and then I have to do my UB key, and then I have to come back and I have to activate that role. Um, and so I developed a PowerShell tool called Entra PIM that's on the PowerShell gallery. And so what Entra PIM lets you do is use PowerShell 7 to bulk activate roles with justifications that follow your conditional access policy, right? So it'll never let you go over what the policy is, and it handles a concept called authentication context inside your conditional access. So what that means is you have to prove you are who you say you are every time you elevate a role. It does not save the token, the auth token. And so those auth contexts in conjunction with conditional access makes you authenticate with a UB key or password matching on every role elevation. So even if a bad actor got your account and your credential, they'd have to be able to uh, satisfy MFA to gain access to your account. And we do all of that through PowerShell.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, then I say to all the people that listen to this episode, you find all the stuff and links in the show notes on the M365 podcasts. So you can find the link from Mark Orr's tool there. So um yeah, will you or can organization require justification before innovation? Is this possible?
Yeah. So the way that I have seen most organizations handle privileged identity management is with um, self activation, right? So I'm an administrator. I need to go do a task. I write a justification. I'm able to auto elevate, right? And so, one of the things that I see leveraged the least amount is requiring a ticket and an approver, right? And so, at big Fortune 500 companies, a lot of them require a service first ticket back to their ITSM. So there has to be a task associated with the elevation, and then there's an approver, especially for high privilege roles like global admin and Intune administrators, especially in the wake of the striker attack where they deleted all of those machines, right? We started to look a little bit more closely at how we were um, doing elevations because they were able to get access to an account and then create another account. And if there would have been an approval workflow, that might not have happened. And so, yes, you can require approvals. I recommend every organization require approvals. Um, and part of the reason that a lot of organizations don't require approvals is because there's a gap.
Mm,
And the only way that the um, approver is notified of a request for approval is through email. And so, because of that, what happens oftentimes is junior administrator will request elevation and then Mark's in a meeting or Mark went to the grocery store, he didn't see it, and then the administrator is saying to me, Mark, are you going to approve my request? Can you please review it? And it's stuck somewhere in an email. And so I see a lot of pushback on that. But where there's a will, there's a way. You can get those out to Microsoft Teams and make it a little more user friendly.
mm. Yeah, and there's also a topic I think every company loves. It's to be audited. What audit capabilities does the PIM provide?
Say it one more time.
Uh, yeah, I think um, what audit capabilities does PIM provide?
Did you say outage? I apologize. Other?
Yeah, audition when some comes to approve.
Oh, gotcha. So, it's highly auditable, right? And so you can do an access review on privileged identity management request. And so, um, a lot of organizations, when somebody writes a justification for the elevation, like, you sometimes you could just write cats, 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 because no one's reading what that justification is. And so, I've worked really closely with administrators across multiple roles. Write a good justification because if when you elevate, right, and you go out and you do a thing, right, we may need that audit trail to say, hey, you elevated to remove someone from the group, but that's not the only thing you did when you elevated, right?
Good.
And so if you can have task-based driven um, justifications, it makes it more highly auditable. And then if you can layer approvals on top of it, it gives you another layer of auditability and protection if something were to go wrong. You can trace an event or an outage back to an elevation.
Cool. And yeah, uh, um, there's especially here in Europe, we have one thing we all love. It's to be compliant. What compliance requirements become yeah easier with Microsoft Entra ID PIM?
Yeah, and so every industry has different regulatory compliance um, requirements, right? Whether that's FRB with the Federal Reserve Board, whether that's HIPAA, whether that's GDPR, those sort of things. Um, my message as it pertains to this, right, is to have a paper trail, right? And so if you can go from point of elevation to point of action
Mhm.
or outage or event and go backwards from event to action to elevation, and you can show the audit trail with the rationale and the justification, you may not make every auditor happy, but you'll at least be able to tell your side of the story. You'll be able to provide each piece of the puzzle. And auditors, as difficult as they can be to uh, work with in a highly regulated industry where specific compliance rules are enforced, they don't lose common sense. And so if they can see the thought process all the way through and then they can trace it back to an elevation, it can help with um, compliance and audit reviews as they happen quarterly, biannually, and annually.
Did you see common deployment mistakes when companies start with PIM?
Yeah, I think the most common one is they read a document
Mm.
and then they put it in and they're like, "Oh, it says multi-factor authentication." But then I go review and we never looked at authentication context. So when you enforce MFA, it only requires MFA one time and the token continues to be satisfied. And so each prerequisite elevation doesn't require an MFA challenge. And so I I've done that. It wasn't until I think 24 that I was kind of told like, "Hey, this is what an off context is. We
Mhm.
need to enforce authentication every time and tie it to the conditional access policy. That way, um, you're forced to verify you are who you say you are at every elevation." That's a big one, and then the next one I see, right, is everybody says, well, we want to use device compliance as our um, enforcement mechanism, right? But we're not to device compliance yet. And they say, well, what do I do? And I say, well, there's a concept called device filtering, right? So even though you're not at a place where you're ready to enforce device compliance by conditional access, you can use an object ID from a device and you can say, if you're not coming from this device, we're not going to allow you, right? And so that's a shortcut to device compliance. And
Mm.
so if you're not doing device compliance, use authentication context, use device filtering, and tie them into conditional access. And if you are using device compliance, layer that device filtering on top, right? That way, each admin has a primary workstation. And if a bad actor were to compromise some credentials or did get a hold of an account, if they're in another city, state from an unknown device, there's nothing that they can do. It's a full stop. They're just blocked.
Um, and a lot of companies also, I hear it often, it's the CFO or the fine ops dudes. How does the licensing works on Entra ID?
Yeah, so I never think that security should be restrictive, but for Entra PIM, I believe you need a P2 license, which comes at an additional cost.
Mm.
Um, but while it's a additional cost, my perspective is it's not cost prohibitive. It's not a full stop, but it's if you're in a CSP, it's per user per month per year, and then if you're in an EA, work with your value added reseller. Um, when you have an E3 or an E5, with E5, it would be included. And then with E3, I'm sure that they could work something out with you to give you some step up pricing, but there is a cost consideration there.
Yeah, also, yeah, you're also passionate about PowerShell. Why is, yeah, automation such an important skill? I think a little bit about the infrastructure as code as keywords.
Yeah. So, um, hmm. So I went and got my graduate degree in information technology, right? And so um, I thought I was God's gift to IT. I got a good GPA, had graduated. I kind of told my manager I want a promotion. My manager came back and said, "Well, you're going to need to learn some PowerShell first." And I had no earthly idea what PowerShell even was, right? And so the whole concept around Windows 10 and Windows 11 is if you can click it, you can automate it, right? And so the mechanism by which you automate it is PowerShell. And so um, for me, um, I don't like graphical user interfaces, and so my boss will give me a hard time, or my coworkers will give me a hard time, and they'll say like, Mark created another PowerShell module, or Mark created another terminal user interface tool. Cool, um, but there's some real world limitations to graphical user interfaces, right? And I'll give you an example. I got a message from a client. PIM is down. And they said, I know. And they said back to me, well, we've got a employee that's acting a fool right now. I said, okay. I said, did you try to activate your role using PowerShell? And they said, no, how did you do that? And I said, deep breath, go grab this PowerShell module and see if you can elevate. And lo and behold, they could. And then they said, but Entra's down. How do I block them? And I said, well, let me give you some commands to kill their last session, change their password, and log them out.
Mm,
And the client came back to me and kind of said, how on earth did you even know to do that? And they said, well, how did you know that it would work? And I said, because the API never went down, the graphical user interface did.
mm,
So you're interacting directly with the API through Microsoft Graph, and that service never went down, so PowerShell is going to work. Now,
mm,
that's not 100% no technology is, but in this particular instance, the graphical user interface crashed and died, but PowerShell worked. And we saved that particular client um, a lot of reputation damage because the employee was just simply disgruntled and was gonna sling mud at a wall until something stuck. And
mm,
so we got them out of the environment and offboarded through PowerShell. And that is the one real world example that I give repeatedly because I don't know how many times the GUI's had a delay or the GUI's had a problem, but I go to PowerShell and it works, and then I just kind of move on with my day. But that's the example that I like to call out often.
yeah, yeah. So you have the to go over the hard way to learn PowerShell. Can you give some advice to administrator learning PowerShell today a little bit more easier?
Yeah, for sure. So when I start to talk about my journey into PowerShell, I wrote a blog and I kind of made fun of myself and I titled the blog, Bro, I Don't Know How to Code, My PowerShell Journey. And so when I first started PowerShell, it looked a lot like this. I would code to a Stack Overflow. I would go Google something. I would go ask a developer, hey, how do you do this? Right. And so I kind of stopped myself and I said, if there's a task in the GUI that I have to do three or more times,
Mm,
the fourth time, let's solve it with PowerShell. Right. And so I'd go out to Stack Overflow, I'd find a GitHub, I'd find a command, it'd work. Right. But then I would be like, what was that command? What was that script? Where did I save it? What did I do? And so one of the ways that where my PowerShell journey kind of took off was with a tool called PS Readline. It's a PowerShell module that stores your history in your terminal. So
mhm,
when you do a connect MG graph or you do a start dash intra pem or you type a big long graph query, right? It stores it to memory. And then all you have to do is remember the first couple of characters of the command, and it'll show you all the history of the things that you've done successfully in the past. And then all of a sudden, right, I started to be like, I remember this. We can make a pattern out of this. We can repeat over and over again. And then it just became um, second nature. Um, and so I started with PS Readline, um, and I'm just gonna call a spade and take 2 seconds to use your platform to talk about something that's meaningful and powerful to me, and that's
Mm,
the use of AI. The
mm,
use of AI to learn how to code. Make the AI work for you. Don't have the AI do your job.
mhm,
When you do, um, it's really easy to say, write this code for me, push it to GitHub. And so what I do is I say, I want to get these device details from Intune. I want to get a detail about a user from Entra ID. Give me the commands. Let
mm,
me execute the code. And
mm,
then there are multiple times when I'm doing something that I don't understand. I will literally type it out from one screen to another, and I'll follow a do while loop, or I'll follow a try catch through the block of code. And so what AI has kind of become is my senior developer,
mm,
because 2, 3 years ago I would have had to got on the phone and said, "Hey, senior developer, I'm stuck," right? And so what I've done with AI is, instead of just having it write my code for me, I've had it teach me. And so if I don't remember something and I type it into my PowerShell 7 terminal and PS readline doesn't know what I'm talking about, I say, "Hey Claude, hey Codex, what is the command for da 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 da?" And then it says, "Well, here's the command." And I say, "Okay, now I'm going to execute it in PowerShell 7. Here are the results." And then I say things like, "Why are these results this way? What can we do differently? How can we expand that data type?" Stuff like
mm,
that.
mm,
And so a basketball coach said this to me one time, right? If you want to get good at basketball, play basketball. If you want to get good at PowerShell, stop relying on the graphical user interface, find a place to start, solve a small problem, and then do it repeatedly. Once you've solved a small problem, graduate to a slightly bigger one, and a bigger one, and a bigger one. Use PS Readline, use artificial intelligence, but use it smartly to teach back. And then over time, you will develop skills and tools that you won't even recognize until you just realized you entered 30 lines of code and you didn't look at a single thing that Claude said.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I think this AI example is it's really good. I have tried out a tool. I think it was called Rafter, and you can check GitHubs how secure they are and so on. And more simply do it's use 9 I think 9 MMLs and check the same code, and then they say what's not secure. And the funny thing is, it's there are some really good scripts, but a lot more than the half have hard coded the the passkeys, the passwords in it. So much for the community. What community contribution are you most proud of?
Yeah, so from a tools perspective, I think I'm proudest of Autopilot cleanup. And so what that particular tool does is, um, when you need to migrate or offboard an autopilot device, there's three records, right? There's an autopilot record, an Intune record, and an Entra ID record. And so what often happens is someone will forget to delete the Intune device, or they'll remove the device hash, or they'll maybe do both, and then they'll forget, right, to um, remove the Entra record, and then we have a bunch of orphaned records and a mess. But that project took me to a place um, where I really had to stop and think. I had a lot of people give me feedback on the tool, and one person, IT professional, reached out to me and said, "Hey, could you add the wipe function?" And I said, "Sure." So we'll wipe the device. We'll delete the autopilot registration, the Intune record, and the Entra ID. And then he said, "Do you think this could be used for a migration?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, an autopilot um, device hash can't exist two places at once." And I said, "Right." And I said, "Do you have the hashes?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, you could send a wipe command to all of your devices in bulk, and then you could remove the autopilot record and the Intune record and the intra record, and then upload the hashes into the new tenant, and away you go. Completely reset, hash is uploaded, the user turns the device on, and it picks up the new enrollment, and away they go." And so he called me and said, I'm having some problems. I said, "Well, I'm more than happy to jump on." And we worked through it, and um, he was able to bulk remove and clean up all the records and then import and enroll. And in one day, they went from one tenant to another tenant in an 8-hour shift. And I was super proud of it. Um, but it made me stop and think, right? So I wasn't an MVP at that point. Um, a, a lot of people post blogs, content, that type of thing, and then it's crickets or ghosts, right? And so, one of the things that I've sort of challenged myself was, if you're gonna write content or produce content, if you're gonna help people speak, don't
Mm,
just talk about it, be about it. So if somebody has a question, answer it, help, hop on a call. And so, from a contribution perspective, I think that the thing that I'm most proud of is helping others, being
mm,
available, um, living up to that MVP status, that it's not just the three letters next to my LinkedIn, that, that I actually care and we're actually going out and helping other people. Right. And so I think that's my biggest contribution to the community, because I don't know everything, um, and I never will. And so if I don't know the answer, I'm going to go reach out to that community, and we're going to go find the answer. I'm going to bring it back to you, and I'm going to help you. And if I'm not the right person to help you, let's go find the person who is.
mm. Yeah, interesting. You say something interesting, so I'll go a little bit back. You say from one to other tenant. What capabilities have Entra ID from multi-tenant or geo-tenant environments?
Yeah. So from a migration perspective, cloud to cloud migrations weren't supported. And you had to use third party tools to migrate from one tenant to the other, right? And so when you migrated workloads, it looked like um, using a third party tool, and then assessing your workloads and those variety of things, right? And that was kind of a solved problem. And so Microsoft introduced very recently, I can't remember the date, but um, they have comprehensive tools now to migrate cloud to cloud. But that doesn't solve the endpoint, right? Microsoft's guidance is still a wipe and re enroll. And so when you take a tool like Autopilot Cleanup, you can wipe, clean up the records, and flip them all at the same time. And so you can do it programmatically through PowerShell, with the caveat that the device has to be up and online, right? It has to be reachable. And so as long as it's reachable, Autopilot Cleanup gives you kind of a shortcut to move devices from one tenant to another.
Mm. A lot of people say Active Directory and Intune are dead. Are they really dead, or there are more extra dead?
Um, well, Um, I've got a friend on Twitter that calls Active Directory hack. what did she say? She called it Active Directory. And so if you're still on AD and you're in a hybrid state, I would recommend getting to Entra ID and evaluating those um, on-prem dependencies when and where you can, and getting to Entra ID cloud native. And if you can't, take a look at something like Entra Private Access. That way you can have cloud native endpoints back to Active Directory.
When we have, well, what did you think? Which role does Defender play, as especially Defender for identity, actually?
Yeah, so I think that lots of organizations sort of um, do what they do with pen, right? And so um, I actually noticed you published something on cloud apps, right? And it really got my interest, and I sat and listened to the podcast on cloud apps. Defender for cloud apps, because so many people don't know what applications are in their environments, and Defender for identity and cloud apps and MDE for endpoints. I see so many organizations that think set it and forget it, but it's got to be finely tuned, like you kind of talked about in some of your examples. It's got to be finely tuned for the identity, finely tuned for the application, finely tuned for the endpoint, right? And so it's a defense in depth. You have your identity management, your multi-factor patterns, requirements, conditional access. You have your device compliance. You have MDE on the device, right? Um, and so as you add each layer, it sort of creates a defense in depth, and each one becomes a gate. So from my perspective, it all comes together, and each one of those is a piece to the puzzle. And leaving any one of those out of the puzzle leaves an incomplete picture.
Yeah, awesome. I do everything a rapid fire round or a lightning round, where I ask short questions and for short answers. So let us start. Coffee, tea, or energy during development?
Code Zero. Is that
Okay.
qualifying?
It's also okay. Windows Terminal or PowerShell ISE?
Windows PowerShell.
Intune or Configuration Manager?
Oh, Intune for days. I don't do config man or SCCM.
Conditional access or PIM?
Ooh. Um, hmm. I'd say conditional access, because you can't do PIM right without it.
Your favorite PowerShell module?
My favorite PowerShell module? Um, Get Windows Autopilot import GUI.
Most underrated Microsoft security feature.
Most underrated Microsoft security feature. I have to say cloud apps, but you can do some amazing stuff with Defender for cloud apps.
One Microsoft product everybody should learn today.
One Microsoft product everybody should learn today. Um, if you at, at this point, if you're starting um if you're starting off, start with GitHub. Learn GitHub core principles, because as we move into an agentic world, GitHub principles are going to become one of the utmost important skills.
Through your military career, what the one productivity habit you say everybody should learn?
From my military career, um, I think that um, from the military, I would learn um, basic SharePoint development, because no matter if you're a power user or an administrator, you can use SharePoint development across OneDrive and SharePoint. And ultimately, if you're an information worker and not an administrator, it'll make you better regardless of the role.
Okay. And when Microsoft come to you, Mark, and say, "Okay, Mark, here you get all the resources, all the money you need," what feature will you develop?
Um, the feature that I would develop today, um, hmm, so I would do two things, and they're kind of unilateral to each other. So when you go into the Intune portal, you don't know if a device is online or not, right? So you just have the last check-in date. So I would build out a real-time response indicator that shows me whether a device is online or offline, whether I can interact with that device. And then sort of a bridge on top of that is I would make um, Intune remediations, I would develop those remediations a little bit more. I would increase the number of remediations that we could do. I would um, work on an instant response to the endpoint. If it's online, give me the data back immediately. Write it to an OData table or a JSON and give me the response. And so if we could somehow do, I think it's called um, I I don't want to butcher the acronym, so I'm not going to. And so if the device is online and we can get a real-time response from it, and we can get real-time data back, how valuable would that be?
Okay, then the last question of the lightning round is when someone comes to Kansas, what should he try for food?
Oh, definitely Joe's Barbecue or Q39. Kansas City's religious about their barbecue, and Joe's and Q39 don't disappoint. It doesn't matter if you want a turkey sandwich, burnt ends, or ribs. Joe's won't disappoint.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So then my final question is if every IT administrator listening today could remember one lesson from this talk today about identity security and privilege access, what lesson should he take away?
Yeah, for sure. Um, the lesson is protect identity with um, multi-factor authentication, specifically phishing resistant off. Start there. Enforce phishing resistant authentication.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. We covered, I think, in this our incredible range of topics from journey as Marine and Microsoft MVP to modern identity, Microsoft iTunes, device management, PowerShell automation, and yeah, deep exploring in Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. One of the biggest takeaways from today's conversion is that security is no longer just protecting device or networks. It's about protecting identities and ensuring privileged access existing only when it's truly needed. And yeah, so yeah, thank you for being here. I think everybody to listen today. Share it. I think it's a real important topic. And yeah, thank you, Mark, for being here, for spend this hour with me. And this was a really cool session. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.